Well, thank you. I'm terrified, obviously, putting my head into the lion's den here, the birthplace of the modern age, the birthplace of nuclear, the birthplace of the atom. I work with The Guardian. In theory, I am scrupulously unbiased. I see both sides of the story. I'm as fair as could be, and I'm here arguing against nuclear power. Very forcibly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to argue with my colleagues here that nuclear power is actually a brilliant feat of science and engineering, but it actually has absolutely nothing to do with generating electricity. It has everything to do with dogma and politics. I will argue it's not needed, it's not trusted, it's outdated, it's unaffordable, it's dangerous, and it's not fit for purpose. I could go on, but I won't. So let's start with what has happened this week. We have seen Hinkley Point basically being given the go-ahead by the government. This is the most expensive project that Britain has ever approached. What we knew yesterday was it was going to cost 35 billion quid. We knew that it may not work. We know that it has no completion date. We know that it's certain to cost more because every nuclear power station has always cost more than has been built. And we know that we're going to have to pay at least 2 or 3 times the going rate for electricity for many, many years, for 2 generations. So it's your children's children. Even the Financial Times, even The Economist, even the Daily Mail, bless it, everybody, even the environmental writers like Mr. Monbiot and others, who have gone towards the nuclear camp, even they recognize that this is a totally stupid, bad, rotten deal for everybody. It makes absolutely no sense whatever. The only people who can afford it are the Chinese government and effectively the French government. It's not we can't afford it, so we have to go elsewhere. That was yesterday. Actually, I don't know if you've read the Guardian website today, but you'll find that that is out of date already. What we found in the House of Commons library is the real costings of this enterprise at Hinkley Point. It's not going to take 10 years to produce electricity, which is what we've promised. It's going to take maybe 20 years. It's not going to cost 30 billion pounds. It's going to cost far, far more. They reckon, this is in the House of Commons library, in these papers here, put there by the government. They say it may cost up to £600 per person per year in subsidy. That's not what we're going to pay. We're going to pay much more than that in subsidy for 35 years. And I would say to you that this is a monumental blunder of the first order. And this is what the nuclear industry says is suitable for Africa, is suitable for Asia, is suitable for everywhere in the world. This is completely nonsensical. Now, we know that nuclear power has a history of monumental blunders. We've given you Windscale, they've given you Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, Fukushima. What you may not know, because it's not really there out in the public domain, is there have been at least 150 and probably 170 or more accidents which have involved deaths of people or significant costs, really significant costs. And they're all on the International Atomic Agency website, so if you want to find them. A new paper, peer-reviewed paper, only a few months ago, showed that there's now, and this was the largest statistical analysis of nuclear accidents there's ever been, showed that there was a 50-50 chance of another 3 Mile Island level accident in the next 10 years, and a 50-50 chance of another Chernobyl level accident in the next 50 years. China is building 400 nuclear reactors. It's got about 50 or 60 on the books at the moment, but its plans are for 400. More than 200 of these are in seismically dangerous areas. Most of them are facing the sea. We know what sea level rise is going to do. We know what's going to happen. India is doing the same. Do you really think that all the governments in the world who want nuclear power are really going to be able to look after their nuclear stations, are going to be able to maintain them, look after the waste for 100, for 1,000, for 10,000 years? This is just fantasy. My fear is not the science. The science is fine. the technology is fine. My fear is human nature, my fear is the reality, and my fear, is, above all, is the politicians. But I'd say nuclear power is actually worse than just the blunders it makes. It's the lies and the broken promises that really get me. The UK, we know, has always lied to us about nuclear power. It's lied about its accidents. It lied about Windscale in 1956. It didn't tell us how bad it was. It was actually the third worst accident there's been in nuclear history. It's lied about the price. It's lied about the waste. They've told us that we cannot keep the lights on without nuclear power. This is completely rubbish. It's this gibberish. Germany can. 170 other countries can. There's no problem at all. They've told us it'll fill the energy gap. This is not true. It's going to take, we know now, at least 20 years before this new generation of nuclear power comes on stream. So there's no argument there whatever. Nuclear power was designed brilliantly in a different age, in an age of energy profligacy, when it was thought that we could produce as much energy as possible. And that was the goal, and that was the aim. And it worked. I would say now that it's crowding out other forms of energy supply. The world has changed. So why does the government lie? I'm not talking about the industry. Why does the government lie to us about nuclear industry? Is it because they know that science is dodgy or the technology isn't going to work? No, it's not that at all. I think it's because nuclear power has actually become at the heart of the authoritarian state, which is determined to centralize power. It sees no other way of doing it. It has to keep power to itself. It's always sought to operate in a sort of Stalinist way, in a culture of secrecy and fear. As a journalist, I try and find out things about nuclear power. It's almost impossible. The statistics are not there. The industry is closed. The government keeps its foot on FOI reports. We cannot find out half the stuff. We cannot get into it. They will never invite The Guardian. Do we ever get invited to go and see Sellafield or whatever? It's an absolute shambles. It was born, as my friend here says, it was born of war and military necessity. And as we know, it has never lost that link to the military. It's bred an ideology, I would say, which is self-serving, which is self-referring, and which is closed and defensive. I can see the attraction for governments. I mean, what better than to have only 10 nuclear power stations in a country, and you only have to deal with 10 people? How much better than to have 1.5 million people, as there are at the moment, generating their own electricity on or solar or whatever it might be. It's how much more efficient to have billions of pounds being given to just a few research bodies who are your friends, you can rely on. How inconvenient that electricity demand in Britain, energy demand in Britain, is actually reducing, is not increasing, it's reduced 18%, 16% in the last 10 years. And it's going to come down more. If there were energy saving, it would come down just like that. We don't need this nuclear power thing. I would say nuclear power is a state enterprise by the state, for the state, and nothing else. I also see an industry which is based on broken promises. We were promised electricity too cheap to meter back in the 1950s. We were promised no subsidies. We've seen what's happening now. They've admitted that these are massive subsidies. Billions and billions of pounds of subsidies are going to have to be used. We were promised an answer to climate change, but actually it is no answer to crowd out all the other alternatives, all the other renewable energy forms of generating electricity with one source, which is nuclear. We were given Thorpe, which has been a complete disaster. We were promised thousands and thousands of tons of reprocessed fuel back in the 1990s. It's given us a few hundred tons. It's terrifying how little we've got out of it. Now they promise fast breeder reactors. They promise tiny little baby reactors. They promise reactors which burn waste. They promise cheaper, safer reactors. They promise fourth generation reactors. They promise fifth generation reactors. And really, we're not getting anywhere forward. All that's happening is the bill gets bigger and bigger, as we see at Hinkley. The risks get greater and greater, and the waste gets more and more deep. But there's now actually fantastically good news. which is basic. We don't need nuclear power. 10 years ago, renewable energy was in its infancy. I accept that completely. But now it's growing very, very fast. Things have changed dramatically in the last 10 years and are about to change again. Another step change is taking place in the technology. Germany, the world's fourth largest economy, does not need nuclear power. It doesn't even need fossil fuel energy. Solar is now massively important for Africa. I was with people this week who were saying there's no way that Africa can go down the same route as Britain or Europe. It's an off-grid continent. It will have to go with smaller distributed energy, solar-powered energy, much, much smaller things. Nuclear power is for the big pylons and a few big cities, and that's all it's good for. Battery technologies are changing. Battery technologies maybe will hold the future for storage. Fantastically exciting. Wind energy is now cheaper than the whole lot put together. All are cheaper than nuclear. And in 20 years' time, we can well expect that nuclear will seem phenomenally expensive and the worst deal conceivable. If just 1/10, 1/100th of the subsidies which have been put in, the research money which has been put into nuclear, were put into renewable energies, we know perfectly well that we would have a different world. We would have a world which would be far more efficient, would need far less energy to power it, and we'd employ tens of thousands more people. I say the world is changing very, very fast and is becoming far more dangerous. According to the International Energy Authority, the UN people, there have been actually 18 thefts of highly enriched uranium and plutonium in the last 25 years. We've had Pakistan nuclear facilities attacked 3 times, at least 10 attacks on nuclear facilities in Iran, Iraq, in Israel, and Syria. 40 countries with nuclear power have all had their nuclear facilities attacked in one way or another. This is fact. This is all we know this. It's not made public, but it is known. That's not safe. Nuclear power is not safe if it attracts terrorists. Nuclear power is not safe if it's the center of wars. I would argue that nuclear power is now the source of the problems and not the solutions. Ladies and gentlemen, however good the science and the technology is, nuclear has to work in the real world, and it cannot be divorced from what's going on at the moment. In the real world, nuclear power costs more and more and more. In the real world, renewable energy costs less and less. Energy demand has peaked in the West and is now coming down fairly rapidly. Energy saving is absolutely the future. We cannot, we could save more energy than nuclear will ever produce just with decent energy saving. Nuclear power is a brilliant idea, brilliantly executed by brilliant people who I love dearly. But I say now the time is, now it's time and my time is over. I would say congratulations to this highly elite team of debaters. But I say that nuclear power is corrupting, it's corrupting the state, it's corrupting the future energy supply, and we should leave it alone and put it in a museum like this, where it would be very well housed. I say nuclear power, no thank you at all.